Hello and welcome to JSB Talks Digital, the podcast for marketers, digital transformation champions, and those of you bringing your skills into the digital age. I'm Joanne Sweeney-Burke and this podcast is brought to you by Digital Training Institute. Be sure to subscribe to JSB Talks Digital on iTunes or Spotify. I promise you the 20 minutes you invest each week with me for free will take your digital and social media knowledge to new levels. In this episode, number 94, I talk GDPR, but from an email marketer's perspective. Coming up in today's show, in social media news, new location features help Snapchat advertising partners, fan badges on Facebook, and new monetization features for creators on Facebook. I interview Peter Bell, Senior Director with email marketing company Marketo. In shoutouts, 3 ways to use GDPR as a business opportunity. Ask JSB, in JSB's column, GDPR, the important reminders. And find out what GDPR tool saved my working week.
Social media news.
Snapchat is rolling out 2 new location-based features to help marketers target audiences more effectively. With the new location category feature, advertisers can target an audience based on location type, such as a beach or a cinema. You can also target more geo-specific features, and this is being rolled out to the US market initially. The second of the new location-centric features uses radius targeting, allowing advertisers to create a customized radius based on an address, a city, a pin, or a point of interest like a sports stadium or a university. Both of these ad filters are available now via a new location searcher bar in Ads Manager, but you need to check if it's available in your market. According to Marketing Land, Snapchat is also testing a foot traffic insights tool aimed to help advertisers with brick and mortar locations more easily track in-store foot traffic. Specifically, the tool can provide information of users who visited the location, including their age, gender, and their interests. Facebook has announced a new feature to encourage greater community engagement with creators. In a blog post, Facebook announced that they're starting a new test that highlights a creator's top fans by displaying a badge next to their name and adding their name to a leaderboard of highly engaged fans. Facebook says, "We'll identify top fans based on how often they comment, share, react, or watch a creator's content, as well as the creator's interactions with the fan and other criteria. Fans will opt into the experience and they can turn off the feature at any time. This test will start with a small set of creators in the coming weeks." Facebook has announced 2 new monetization features for creators which will come online in the coming months. First, they have a tool that helps advertisers and creators easily connect for branded content opportunities on the social network. Facebook says, creators participating in the test can set up a portfolio highlighting their area of expertise, and advertisers can search and find creators to collaborate on compelling branded content campaigns. Additionally, we'll be testing a way for fans to become a supporter of the creators they love. Fans will have the option to support the creator with a monthly payment in exchange for perks like exclusive content and a badge highlighting their status as a supporter. Facebook also says, "We'll start testing with a small set of creators so that we can gather feedback from them and their fans before expanding." Note, the testing feature means that Facebook app will now include an in-app purchase label in the App Store and on Google Play.
Interview.
In this episode, I interview Peter Bell, Senior Director with email marketing company Marketo. As part of the regional leadership team, Peter leads Marketo's marketing in the EMEA region. With over 25 years of experience in marketing, Peter has contributed to the success of some of the most recognizable global product brands in the software and digital media industries. Peter joined Marketo from Microsoft, where he most recently led the Windows and Surface business in the UK. Prior to this, Peter ran Microsoft's UK display advertising business. The media portfolio included MSN, Xbox, Skype, Windows, and Outlook.com. An early pioneer in the PC and internet sector, Peter's early roles were in technology, a passion and skill set that are more relevant to marketing than ever before. In this interview, I discuss the implications of GDPR from an email marketing perspective.
JSB Talks Digital.
Peter Bell, you're very welcome to JSB Talks Digital. You are the marketing director for Marketo in Europe. Thanks for joining me today.
That's okay. Thank you for the opportunity.
So we're going to talk about GDPR because guess what? Every marketer is probably talking about GDPR because it's coming down the line in a couple of months. Do you think that GDPR will have a big impact on marketers?
I have a really simple answer to that. Yes and yes. It's the most significant piece of privacy legislation that I think we've seen anywhere. We've seen a lot of activity from regulators around the world. You've got the Spam Act in Australia. You've got Castle in Canada. Germany's obviously always been very on top of this. So it is just the latest in the line of regulation, but this is the granddaddy of them all.
So let's do a deep dive into what marketers need to know ahead of May 25th. I like this conversation because we're not talking about GDPR generally, we're talking about GDPR in the context of marketing. So what do we need to know?
Yeah, I'm going to give you two forms of answer to this. I want to give the one I prefer, which is, look, this is about building trust and integrity in our marketing. And very rarely does the conversation start there. It tends to start with a technical definition of 6 principles and Article 5 and subclause this. And actually, if we just put that to one side, that's all really important. But what's really important is keep the central notion of this as an opportunity to build greater trust and greater integrity into the marketing that we produce. Every B2B marketer has been told quite often by sales to go buy a list and send some email. And we know in our heart of hearts, we know in our statistics that yields nothing. If we have that mindset, I would start from there. In terms of what are we actually going to have to do in more technical terms, we are going to have to uphold those 6 principles. That means we're going to have to be specific about where we collect data, transparent in making it clear how we're going to use it, and all the rest. And that will mean specific changes on our websites, on our landing pages, and on forms. But fundamentally, we're going to have to run a lot tighter ship.
Will the same rules apply then, Peter, for marketers in large organizations and solo marketers perhaps running online businesses?
Well, look, if you're marketing to an EU citizen, then you are covered, are subject to the same rules under GDPR. There's no escaping that. There are some changes for smaller organizations, particularly there is probably not the necessity to appoint a data protection officer. That's probably one difference. What I would say is, and this gives me a great opportunity to say, whilst I'm here to talk about best practice, I'm not a lawyer, so none of this constitutes legal advice. But for smaller organizations, certainly, the overhead of having a dedicated protection officer won't be there. But I'd look, you are going to be subject to the same rules, and it's important. This is about actually better marketing. So why wouldn't you uphold those principles? Would be my argument.
So Marketo provides email marketing software. Have you had to update any aspects of your product to reflect the new laws?
We haven't, but that's primarily because of our experience with other regulated environments. So I mentioned, Castle, and we have customers in Germany. So that has meant we've had to be across this for some time in order to comply with existing legislation. What we have had to do specifically for GDPR is make a number of changes in internal business practices. We've conducted something which most organizations would have to do, which is a DPIA, or Data Protection Impact Assessment, which is about tracing, once you have a piece of data, where does it go, where does it end up, who handles it, and what needs to change in order to uphold GDPR internally. So we're a long way through that as part of an overall compliance plan. And our contractual obligations do change with our customers, so there've been changes there. But as a platform, we did audit and we found a clean bill of health. That's not to say we won't make changes. I'm sure customers will come with feedback in terms of, hey, you could make this perhaps a little easier, that type of thing. But so far, clean bill of health.
Great. So what about those of us that currently have email marketing partners outside of the EU? With GDPR, do we need to ensure our data, if our business is registered in the EU and we're speaking and reaching out to EU citizens, do we need to ensure that that data is hosted on EU-based servers?
The short answer to your question is no. GDPR doesn't change the law around where data can be held. A couple of things I'd add on to that, though. The first is make sure that your data processor, which in plain English terms, any SaaS-based company who is considered the processor in the majority of cases. Customer is the data controller, we're the data processor. So one, in order for you to be compliant as the data controller, your chosen data processor they have to be compliant. If they're not compliant, you're out of compliance. Second thing is, so the data can be held in any jurisdiction which is known as an adequate jurisdiction. It's a technical term by European Union. And for most companies who are contracted with an American company or an American-based company, this means making sure they have the appropriate DPA in place. And that DPA will have had to have been updated to account for new obligations under GDPR.
Okay, so a similar question, but maybe you've already answered it. Let's talk about UK-based businesses and email servers. With Brexit, and I know the process has not been finalized, what do we need to think about in terms of, suppliers or customers based in the UK?
Yeah, this is very simple. First off, Brexit is a little further away, so we've only got 2 months to go until GDPR comes into force. Brexit's probably 12 months away, all things being equal. So the UK will be in the European Union when GDPR comes into force. And furthermore, the UK government has indicated that it will pass the GDPR into UK law before Brexit.
Okay, that's very clear. It's good to clear that up. So if you already have a subscribed email database, which most people will if they're listening to this podcast or watching this video, and it's already permission-based, so you can prove that people have been explicit in signing up to your database, what do we need to do? Do we need to go back and get these people to re-opt in? What's the situation there?
This is one where you definitely need to get around the table with your legal team because each company and each company's legal team will have a different interpretation of both GDPR and attitude towards risk. So this is that last mile of interpretation you do need to just get around the table and come to a business decision. And I do stress it's a business decision. Whilst there's different legal interpretation, that attitude to risk can shape things quite significantly. That said, if you believe that your database is clean and you can point to the fact that consent was freely given, it was specific, you are transparent, in other words, upholding the principles of GDPR, then you're probably in good shape. I'd say not many people that I've spoken to have records of the quality that GDPR is asking us for going back over time. And at that point, there is something in GDPR called legitimate interest, where if you can prove that there are grounds for legitimate interest, perhaps they're an existing customer, perhaps they've been engaging with your email marketing, but you can point to that, then you may be able to employ legitimate interest alongside any other evidence you've got. This is definitely one for your legal team. It's a very, I wouldn't say contentious area, but it's an area, quite a subjective area in terms of what does legitimate interest constitute. But GDPR is clear in this that it can be used for for marketing purposes. It's just the exact interpretation is far from clear.
So also in preparation for this podcast, I interviewed a Brussels-based tech journalist, and she was very clear. She maintains that there will be prosecutions immediately once this legislation comes into being. I mean, with that in mind, should we be nervous of the new rules?
Well, look, I think GDPR has been law for nearly 2 years now. We're actually operating in the grace period. So I suspect, there is a point of view from the European Union side that, we've given you 2 years of grace, so I could see, prosecutions following, given we have had this notice period. I think I would be most nervous about something which doesn't get discussed a lot, which is the principle of accountability. So without sounding like a lawyer, because I'm not a lawyer, in Article 5 there are 2 paragraphs. Paragraph 1 lays out the 6 principles. Paragraph 2 talks about the principle of accountability. And I'm not convinced that everyone has read on to paragraph 2. I think they've got to paragraph 1 and stopped, because paragraph 2 is all about, can you prove that you are upholding those principles? Now that means having, well-designed process, good staff training and awareness on that process, that you can see it in day-to-day use across marketing. It means being quite process-driven. And that's forgive me, but marketing is not the most process-driven environment necessarily. So for me, this cultural change is perhaps one of the biggest challenges for us as marketers. We use a lot of agencies. We use, teams of people working collaboratively on things. If I were nervous about anything, I would be looking at principle of accountability. Yes, I need to ensure I've got the right consent notices on my website, that all of that work is done, privacy statements have been updated, etc. But the principle of accountability, I think, is a big challenge for us specifically as marketing, simply because we haven't historically been ultra process driven.
Okay, so this leads me to my next question again, which I think you may have already answered. Do you think GDPR will elevate the standard and relevance of customer data, in that while some marketers are focused on the vanity metrics associated with the size of their list, won't quality and relevance become more to the fore and more important?
Oh, I hope so. I really do. I've been on record as stating GDPR as an opportunity, and I think it's one of the biggest opportunities we'll get in a long time, to banish bad practice. I talked about being backed into a corner to buy a list a short while ago. You now have the ultimate defense against being backed into that corner. Look, it would be illegal. So I think it is just a tremendous opportunity for us to drive way better marketing, way better customer engagement. As our own CEO likes to say, no one wants to be marketed to, everybody wants to be engaged. And it's a nice way of putting it. When it's done well, we appreciate it. I can think as a consumer of examples of it, or as a business to business, where it's just a delight. And it's the same examples, right? It's the Netflixes, it's the Amazons of the world who do this really, really well, and it works. And yet, how often are our inboxes full of just, stuff we're not going to respond to, and yet, if Ken says, hey, we did an email send, and we sent it to this many people. Great. What did it change? Nothing. Okay. So yeah, I'm with you. This is, if I'm animated about this, it's because just that excitement about banishing that poor practice.
Let's talk about the Goliaths of the internet then. You've already mentioned Amazon. Yeah. Let's talk about Google and Facebook. Do we know yet if they are compliant with GDPR and how that might change our own interactions with them? I'm thinking specifically about remarketing to people on Facebook and also on the Google display network, on those people who have previously visited your website? Where do we stand on that?
For their specific compliance, I'd refer you to them. I shouldn't comment on their compliance. I checking their websites earlier. Looks like they're both working aggressively towards compliance. That would be only natural. This does take us, however, into a separate piece of legislation known as the e-Privacy Directive. This is due to come into, in fact, it was due to come into force at the same time as GDPR, and it picks up where GDPR left off and really talks about cookies. It's not just about cookies. It's about privacy in general, things like the Internet of Things and stuff like that. But cookies are the most visible part, and they're the part which are most pervasively in use, specifically across the online advertising industry. I said it was due to come into force at the same time as GDPR. Well, it's behind schedule because the debate around this has been vociferous. The IAB in the UK have been particularly pointed in their feedback around this, and it continues to be the subject of a lot of debate. Likely outcome potentially is that we end up with classification of cookies, those which are essential. Those would be things like ensuring the thing you put in your shopping basket is still there when you get to the checkout, which is, kind of essential. And those which are then used for, as you described, retargeting, generally, fairly expansively used by the advertising industry. We need to come to a resolution on it, and a resolution that we all agree upon. It affects Marketo less because we're not in this space, but certainly for our peers in the ad tech world, then this is a big deal. With some experience in that field, what I would say is we need to come to a resolution which works for all parties. Because again, it comes back to, what's the effectiveness of marketing, specifically advertising. But, one of the great things about online advertising, it can be targeted, and it can be targeted in ways which are really helpful. There are products which I am interested in, and there are those which are patently I'm not interested in. And I'd rather, where advertising is paying for the service I'm using, I'd rather see advertisements for things which are of interest to me and are relevant to me than things which are, completely irrelevant to me. But clearly there's a fine line here. I talked about trust and integrity. And we've got to mutually find a way forward. So we'll see. A long answer to your question, but I'm not sure when it will come into force. There's been 2 rounds of revision. There's a lot of discussion, so we'll see.
So finally, Peter, as kind of takeaways for marketers, what should we be doing by March 25th when GDPR finally ends the grace period and we're all subjected to the new rules?
If you haven't started, get moving fast. But I'd hope for anyone who's listening to this, frankly, that you would already have an operational program in place. The likelihood is your company will have an overall GDPR compliance program underway anyway, because this affects not just marketing, but things like employee records. So it's a whole company thing. Marketing need to be a work stream in that. If you're not already, you need to get that seat at the table. There are some very practical things to do. You need to update your privacy notices. You need to ensure you're capturing and recording consent in a very robust way, looking at the processes that sit behind that, as I mentioned a couple of times around accountability. You do have to make opt-out as easy as opt-in. Your preference center may need some investment. That hasn't been an area which has traditionally attracted a lot of funding. And a well-designed preference center that encourages opt-in because you're being clear and transparent is going to work a lot better for you than a poorly designed one, which just encourages no thanks. And make sure you've got all the right links, whether it be for web tracking and cookie opt-out, as we were just talking about, if you're doing that, whether it be clear links on your website to the preference center, and make sure your landing pages and have all the correct notices and language there. So there's a very practical list of things to do. That would be my brief summary of them. And I think if you haven't already, I think most important is that emotional switch, which is, look, this is a fact of life. This is my opportunity to drive, better marketing, get away from the vanity metrics you're talking about, and just, do it with a smile on my face rather than a burden or feeling like it's a burden, because it's asking us to lift our relationship with prospects and customers. What's not to like?
Peter Bell, Marketing Director for Marketo in Europe. I totally agree. I think this is an opportunity that marketers should embrace with both hands. And as you say, elevate the standards right across all verticals and all industries. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with me today. And where can people find out a little bit more about Marketo?
Super simple, marketo.com. If you'd like to know more about what we're doing with GDPR, then marketo.com's trust site within the main site. If you're a Marketo customer or you're evaluating how to manage this, I was pleased to co-author with our legal team and our product team our practical guide to GDPR. A quick search on Google will give you, along with practical guide and Marketo, that will get you that report. It really is just as it says on the tin, it's a super practical guide for what to do next.
Fantastic. And I will add those links and that download in the show notes and the blog post associated with this podcast and this video. Peter, an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Shoutouts.
In this part of the show, I give shoutouts to brands, organizations, or individuals whose work online is remarkable and worth talking about. In this episode, I share 3 ways to use GDPR as a business opportunity.
1.
Make trust and transparency a cornerstone of your business in the digital age. With GDPR, we are all faced to revisit how transparent we are as a company. So, use this opportunity to review your policies and your procedures.
2.
Be more strict about who joins your list. After all, it's relevance that matters and not just the list numbers. Don't waste your time marketing to people who don't want to hear from you. Make sure you're only attracting the best quality prospects, and when they sign up, you are explicit as to how you're going to use their data. They will be much more inclined to engage and share your content.
3.
It's now time to review your entire data policy and review how you collect and store data. You could consider it a business standard operating procedures spring clean for your business.
Ask JSB.
In this week's Ask JSB, my question comes from Anne on Twitter. Anne asks, JSB, what will you be doing to be GDPR compliant? Thanks for your question, Anne, and a great question it is. Well, first of all, let me say that I will be taking Peter's advice and getting some legal advice. I'm actually taking a GDPR workshop with solicitor Michelle McLaughlin to make sure I am legally aware of my responsibilities. After that workshop, I'm going to draft up my own GDPR action plan and brief my team. I'm also going to review my existing list to make sure that that list is GDPR compliant. Thanks for your question, Anne. Don't forget, if you have a burning social media or digital marketing question, simply click on digitaltraininginstitute.ie/askjsb and leave me a voicemail. You can also send me your questions to any of our social networks.
JSB's column.
In today's JSB's column, I want to remind you of the top 10 most important to-dos ahead of the GDPR full implementation on May 25th. Why don't you consider attending a GDPR workshop with a legal professional? Because Everyone will interpret the law differently, and of course, everyone's business is different. So, it's best to get the input of a legal eagle. If your business is not in the EU, but you sell to EU customers, you will still have to comply with the regulations. So make sure your knowledge is up to date. Did you know that you will need parental consent to process the data of under 16s? So please review if you were collecting the data of minors. After GDPR, data subjects will have the right to be forgotten, and of course you have to offer this right. It will be mandatory to appoint a DPO, a data protection officer, for certain companies, including public authorities and large-scale data processing firms. Data controllers will be required to conduct privacy impact assessments where privacy breach risks are high. Data controllers will also be required to report data breaches within 72 hours. After GDPR comes into place, you need explicit consent, so pre-ticked boxes is not compliance. GDPR requires that subscribers are provided with information on how their data will be used. And finally, GDPR not only sets the rules for how to collect consent, but it also requires companies to keep records of these consents. Don't forget to get your own GDPR action plan in action and actioned before May 25th.
Social media tool of the week.
The GDPR tool that saved my working week this week is the Pocket Guide on GDPR written by Alan Calder. With this pocketbook, you will gain a clear understanding of the GDPR regulations, and did you know it's been purchased already by over 14,000 people worldwide? The guide explains the terms and definitions used within the regulations, its key requirements, and how you must comply. It's also available in Spanish, French, German, and Italian, and you can buy it on Amazon for just €12.95. Check out the blog post associated with this podcast over at digitaltraining.ie for the link to buy it. Thank you so much for tuning into episode 94 of JSB Talks Digital. As always, I have everything discussed on today's show on my award-winning blog over at digitaltraining.ie. Be sure to subscribe to JSB Talks Digital. You'll find us on iTunes, Spotify, Libsyn, Stitcher, or SoundCloud. Please send me your questions for Ask JSB and I'll answer them on the show. Or if you have a great idea or a suggestion of a topic for a podcast, then just let me know. You can send me a tweet to Tweets by JSB, post a comment on our Facebook page at Digital Training Institute, you can snap me to JSB Snaps, or you can send me a message to Instagram at JSB Grams. I'm Joanne Sweeney Burke. This is JSB Talks Digital. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you soon.
JSB Talks Digital.